think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to another Medtech webinar. My name is Nicole Owens. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications for the organization. If you're not familiar with us, we are a membership-based trade association that works to bolster the medical device industry, primarily in New England, through education and connection, events like this, advocacy, and awareness. Today, we have an awesome webinar coming to you live from JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, brought to you by Greenberg Traurig. I'm going to turn it over to our panel in just a moment, but before I do, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so everyone who registered for it will receive a recording of the webinar following our live presentation today. And we are going to have time for Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all the questions that come in. All right, without further ado, I am pleased to turn it over to our host today, AJ Tibbetts. He's a shareholder from Greenberg Traurig. Take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you everyone for joining today. Looking forward to today's discussion. As Nicole said, I'm a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig and a member of our Life Sciences and Medtech, Digital Health and AI practice groups. Greenberg Traurig is a global law firm, presence throughout the world, and full service law firm with a particular focus this week on life sciences and medtech. We have a robust presence here this week. Long been involved with JP Morgan. Love coming out here and seeing exactly what everybody's excited to share and what they've been working on lately and what the mood is in the ecosystem. And that's what we want to talk about here today. We have an excellent pair of panelists here, as well as one of my colleagues, Dave Dykman, and we'd love to share what we're hearing this week as a jumping off point for trends in 2024 for MedTech, growing from 2023 into what we can expect for this upcoming year. I'd love to start off with just some brief introductions, as well as having each one of our panelists share what they see as sort of the word on the street, what the general sentiment is at JP Morgan for our attendees today who haven't been able to make it out to the conference this week. I'll start off with just my own general sentiment to what I've seen this week. As I mentioned a short time ago, I work with a lot of digital health and life sciences companies, a lot of startups in that space, or a lot of people who are working with large companies who are starting to dabble in that space. And I think by and large, what I'm seeing is a lot of optimism for 2024. 2023 was a hard time for growing, particularly in that space. A lot of difficulty with raising money for younger companies or getting money to scale for medium-sized companies. And a lot of people I've spoken with are saying that they're hearing back from potential partners, potential investors, and others a lot faster. It's a lot easier to get first meetings, a lot easier to get second meetings. And when they have those meetings, it's looking like there's going to be more openness in 2024 across the medtech industry. And given my focus in AI, a lot of people are excited to hear about, and a lot excited to share about what they're working on that they're going to be rolling out into the market in 2024. I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say about that general, word on the street in the conference this year. I'd love to start with Ed McNamara, Senior Vice President and Business Development Officer for Life Sciences and MedTech at Bridgebank. So Ed, if you could tell us a little bit about Bridgebank and a little bit about your experience at the conference this week.
Great, thanks AJ. Yeah, Ed McNamara, AJ mentioned, Head of Business Development for Bridgebank's Life Science and Healthcare team. Our background, we're been in market for about 25 years now, supporting life science, healthcare innovation companies, and from kind of idea to exit. And our background is really supporting companies through innovation banking and venture debt money. So it's certainly been a busy week here at JP Morgan for us. Our word on the street, I'd say I'd agree with your sentiment. I think there's a lot of optimism. I think some of it is, to your point, where a lot of meetings are being taken place. It seems like a lot of the VCs we've met with are now getting funding and have funding to kind of put play. I think we saw a good Q4 last year, and hopefully that's rolling over into Q1 here now. So a lot of talk about kind of pre-IPO and IPO markets. We're hearing still a lot of chatter about potential kind of M&A or reverse mergers. But certainly just from a funding standpoint, I think there's a lot of optimism there that the VCs will be back to full scale by the end of the year. And a lot of the companies that have been sitting on the sidelines are kind of kicking the can, for the last 2 years. I think we're going to see a lot of movement this year.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to move next to introducing Bhavesh Bharat from Truffle Capital. He's operating partner at Truffle Capital, which is a European-based venture capital and private equity group. Bhavesh was previously with Medtronic for a long stretch of time and was a regional vice president at Medtronic. So Bhavesh, same question. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Truffle Capital and what you've been seeing this week at JP Morgan in terms of general sentiment.
Yeah, and thanks, AJ. So if I can start maybe introducing Truffle Capital. Truffle Capital is a French VC company based out of Paris. Truffle's been around for over 22 years and is a atypical venture capital company. And the slogan is more of a business builder. What Truffle typically does is it has an academic network of around 40 institutions across the world. And Truffle would mine through IP and work through technology transfers, and then even through its own ideation and bottoms up would build companies and then see them through all the way to exits. And so Truffle's had some sizable exits in the past, built powerhouses and then exited them, and is currently in a place where, in Paris, where we have our accelerator. We have a number of companies working together, learning together, and then building innovations and disruptive innovations. And my role in Truffle is very much in a BD capacity, supporting the Medtech portfolio companies to look at finding investors to come and support that journey and taking them to the next milestones. So as I mentioned earlier, AJ, for me, it was my first JPM. So I came in with curious eyes, having been to several events over the last year. And so I think just to sort of echo what Ed was saying, I think there's definitely a lot of optimism. If I sort of break it down by different stakeholders, if I look at it from an innovator standpoint, and these are the startups that I spend a lot of time with, both in Truffle, but also other startups that we're vetting with our latest fund. From a startup perspective, I would say there's optimism. I would say maybe more hopeful than optimism, hopeful that things are going to get better. We all know that it was very difficult and still is very difficult raising money at the moment. And so people are hopeful that things are going to get better. The timely news of Boston Scientific's acquisition was seen with a lot of positivity, I would say, both from VCs and from startups to show that, the M&A activity is happening. Innovations can really still do well. And so that was received very well and of course, very timely in terms of how it happened and was announced. From an investor standpoint and from the fellow VCs, again, I think optimism in terms of the outlook. I would also say that there's a opportunity, or I would say a hopeful from the VCs that there's going to be some bargains out there. Some of the companies and the startups that had weathered the storm last year, maybe by having some resizing, maybe focusing and really going down and narrowing down that search and that opportunity in terms of the innovation. Those that have gone back and done some bridge financing still are going to now be looking for money. And so as I speak to some of the fellow VCs, they're hopeful that there's going to be some bargains out there this year. There's still going to be some resizing in terms of valuations. And I say optimism from an investor standpoint, more optimism towards the latter part of the year, hoping there's going to be some further reductions in interest rate, access to money, and that will obviously make things a lot better there as well. But I'll keep it as that for now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bhavesh. I'd like to turn to my colleague Dave Dykman, who's the chair of our Life Sciences and Medtech practice group out here at JPM with me this week. Dave, if you want to share a little bit more about your IP practice, and then same question about word in the street, general sentiment from JPM.
Sure. Thanks, AJ, and thank you to MassMedic. This is, the first time MassMedic is doing a webinar live from San Francisco. The four of us are sitting in 4 different hotel rooms, which, if there's any indication how JPM is, the hotel rooms were still ridiculously expensive. I've been coming to JP Morgan for over 20 years now, so I've seen the conference grow and expand, and some people say outgrow Union Square area in San Francisco. But I think the conference has been busy. It's back to near pre-pandemic levels of attendance. The hotel rooms, right, were very expensive, but most hotels are not charging charge you to sit in their lobby, which they started a few years ago when the demand got so high. And I think, I'm a patent attorney. I work with a lot of medical device companies. I've been on the board of MassMedic for over 8 years. And I think, 2 words, and kind of you've heard some of the previous panels, these are 2 words to summarize JP Morgan is cautiously optimistic. The big deals were announced to start the week. As we heard briefly, Boston Scientific's $3.7 billion acquisition of Axonics, that was for implants for urinary and fecal incontinence. They're entering a market where Medtronic's the leader. They're going to be going head to head. It's a really interesting deal. It's a big deal, $3.7 billion, obviously. And you had that to start the week, I think, which set the tone. And I think everyone in the healthcare and medtech community was really happy to put 2023 in the rearview mirror. And there's a very hopeful vibe. The real question, I think, is going to be timing. And is it really optimism, or is it hopeful optimism? And I think this year is really going to be an interesting year, because I think the first quarter, companies and investors are still going to be feeling things out to see if things are staying flat, or they're really going to be on an uptrend. The end of the year, you have election risk. November of 2024. It seems like it's going to be a very engaging election cycle, and that presents uncertainty. So, if you're looking to raise money as a company, if you're looking to do a deal, there probably is a sweet spot, but you probably want to get things done in the second quarter or, before the end of the summer, just so you can eliminate the end of the year risk. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I think there's amazing technologies here. That's, I think, what we're seeing. We're going to get into it a little bit. AI is, it was a buzzword before, but it's coming much closer to a reality, and all companies realize they need to do that. ChatGPT is going to impact the industry as well. There's a lot of game changers that are just around the corner.
Great, thanks, Dave. And I'd love to use that as a jumping off point for sort of what are the hot areas garnering a lot of interest at JPM. We talked about general sentiment, now getting into sort of the technical side of things, or segments of the industry that are a little bit more hot. Bhavesh, if I can start with you, love to hear what you're seeing as the areas that are sparking a lot of interest.
Yeah, I would say David talked about AI. Of course, that continues, and whether it's the health tech, biotech, the digital space continues to raise interest for sure. Robotics, I would say, is a second one that you continuously hear about. Myself here, I'm with one of our CEOs of a robotics company in the TAVR space, but I hear a lot of companies out here from a robotics standpoint, and it's going to be a continuous trend in terms of ability to safely and reproducibly enhance surgery. So I think robotics is another space. Diabetes is another one. There's been several announcements that have come out over the last few weeks in terms of innovations and areas of focus there as well. And then one area I appreciate, we're all in the devices space, but which continues to get the headlines. So I think we've got to mention it is the GLP-1s. Yesterday at JP Morgan, there was a keynote panel on the GLP-1s, and you had a doctor there, and then you had a payer body there as well. But it continues to raise the headlines in terms of what's going to happen from a payer body. Can we afford it? What impact is that going to have on devices, right? Connecting it to diabetes, connecting it to obesity, connecting it to several areas. But I see there's going to be a lot of innovations within that space as well coming out.
Great, thanks, Bhavesh. And Ed, same question. Curious whether you've seen any particular segments in the market that are hotter than others this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my conversations are kind of been twofold. One, diabetes certainly has been a leading kind of piece of the conversations there. Certainly the GLP-1s with the whole obesity market. My view is certainly med device, med tech is a big part of our practice, but we're also looking at biopharma and the biotech side. So we've kind of seen it from both ends, from the pharma view as well as from the med tech, med device side as well. A lot of companies kind of looking at those wearable solutions, so kind of that component of it, and either drug delivery systems or monitoring with some diagnostics components as well. So we're starting to see these kind of blended approaches. Certainly AI has been a trigger word, and I think that's what from the investor standpoint is what's groundbreaking technology here. Where is it going to kind of really push through there versus what is just a simple chat box or simple kind of tool, so to speak. So I think that's still kind of a learning curve for us in regards to the AI technology of what's really groundbreaking, what's not. But certainly for active technology that's impressing us, I'd say kind of those diabetes, some of the diagnostic tools we've seen. And certainly there seems to be a lot of wearables in that end. I think I think of kind of Abbott kind of controlling the market there, on that end of it. So I think it's how can they use that piece of it in kind of a diagnostic tool or kind of a tracker, but for going for other areas as well, so instead of just the diabetes glucose monitoring and really expanding upon that. So seeing quite a few options or talked to quite a few companies kind of pushing in that direction this week.
Yeah, and I think Ed and Bhavesh did a nice job of highlighting the areas, and maybe I think the theme you kind of hear, but if you look at what's a theme of hot areas, JP Morgan is, each public company CEO has 30 minutes to kind of give their outlook to 2024. And of course, most CEOs are going to be optimistic, but I think companies are looking to tackle really the biggest problems, because that they know as a big market can really move the needle and make money. And I think at the top of that list is diabetes. And we've talked about it, but just looking at some of the bigger announcements we've seen this week in the space, it gives you a feel. So, maybe I'll just go through them quickly in a sentence or two. Dexcom has made a huge announcement. Their CEO gave a really interesting quote. They announced their first $1 billion quarter they just had. And he said, in 2019, he spoke at the conference and he announced their first $1 billion year. And now you fast forward 4 to 5 years and it's $1 billion quarter. So that tells you what you need to know about the diabetes market. Huge opportunity. Abbott, another player in the space, they selected the first in the US to be paired with their Freestyle Libre wearable blood glucose tracker. They are going to partner with Tandem Diabetes Company and their insulin pump. So that's kind of taking two separate things and bringing them together. And that's another theme that we'll hear throughout this is convergence. I think everything is converging in the tech, med tech, and medical device space. Medtronic Diabetes also made an announcement. They got their European approval for their latest automated insulin pump with a new glucose sensor for the first time. And then looking forward a little more, Embecta, which many of you remember is the spin out from Becton Dickinson in April of 2022, they submitted a patch pump based disposable insulin delivery system to the FDA for review this week. It's designed specifically for people with type 2 diabetes. So that's another large market there. And so that's just in diabetes, but all the players are announcing big things today. The population's growing, and not surprisingly, the innovation and the money are following that huge market.
David, if I can just add, the other sort of sentiment is very much on that top line growth, and also going after the high double-digit growth markets. So it's really about sort of portfolio management, especially for the bigger players there. Where are you going to play, and making sure that they choose to play in those high double-digit markets. And then, one of the key things that you saw from last year, as people were tightening the belts, was the divestitures, right? You're not hearing as much about that, but I think it's going to be a continued theme where people look at it. But yeah, I'll just add that also we're seeing a lot and hearing a lot on top line growth, and then really picking the most attractive markets that are going to drive the shareholder returns.
Heather, follow-up question on this from our audience, and everyone, there will be time for Q&A at the end, but as you can see right now, if you have a question that's relevant to the ongoing discussion, I'm happy to surface and ask the panel about it. Question came in about consolidation in the diabetes industry, in addition to the partnerships that have been announced. So any thoughts about consolidation in this space?
I mean, I can go first, and then turn it over to anyone else. I think there's a lot of players in diabetes. It is a huge market, but obviously, I think the way to view these partnerships are, in some ways, they're kicking the tires and seeing if the companies work together, the technologies match, and it's almost a first step to consolidation. I think there are a lot of big players, so they can go it alone, but eventually, those companies we mentioned are acquiring a lot of the smaller players. So it's, consolidation, I think, from small to big. The question, I think it's going to be open over the next few years is there going to be a big to big consolidation in the market?
Great. I'll share my thoughts on what I've seen that's hot in this area. Now, I was a software engineer before I went into law, and my legal practice focuses on digital health and AI, as I said earlier. So I've been focusing on the parts of the ecosystem around here and bouncing around receptions that focus on digital health and AI. And that has, for all the reasons everyone would have expected in 2023, been hot right now. And I wanted to reach back to something Dave said, sort of that resonates in this space, is the consolidation between tech, medtech, and life sciences. Because we're seeing more and more traditional tech companies that have usually been B2C or just generally investing in technologies outside of medtech or outside of life sciences, getting into this space to drive health and drive analysis of medical data, drive analysis of medical records, or just generally assisting with development in this space. And I've been working in drug development AI for over 10 years. We started tech bio back when it was not yet called tech bio, and it's just everywhere this year. Lots of biopharma companies, large companies that are experimenting with it more and more, talking about, rather than this is something that's going to happen, but rather something that is happening. I know there were multiple drugs that went into clinical trials in 2023 that came out of AI-assisted drug development programs, and I think we're going to continue to see a lot of that. So that space has been hugely active this week. And as far as the integration that David mentioned, I had just called back to, is wearable space with sensors that are then driving the digital health companion apps or digital health products, or collecting the data to be used in these AI algorithms. Is all of those sensors and wearables and other sources of data are just huge right now. And one of the perpetual conversations in this space that anybody who's in this part of the industry will have heard before is just who's the ROI with for digital, who's the customer. It's easy to identify who is benefiting from the technology, but you want to make sure in this space that the business plan aligns with, in Medtech and life sciences, who is actually going to be compensating for this. And so those discussions are a little bit more mature than I think they have been in the past, because a lot of the discussion in this space used to be, I have a great idea, I have a great product, less focus on where's the ROI, but a lot more jumping to the point on who is the customer, who's going to be paying for this. It's been a really exciting thing to see this week. Look to move to the next topic, unless anybody on the panel has thoughts on that hot areas. But we've been talking about what's been happening at JPM, and I want to take the conversation forward into where are we going for the rest of this year in 2024 and trends. And a good place to start with trends is what happened in 2023. And Ed, I know coming from the banking sector, you have a lot of thoughts on 2023, or maybe some trauma to process. But at least from your colleagues at other banks, I'd love to hear about how 2023 went for Bridge Bank, and what you were seeing in this space in last year.
Sure. So, I think coming into, 2023 JPM, there was a lot of optimism, coming out of JPM last year. They called it, the year of venture debt. So, as a large venture debt player in the space here in the U.S. and internationally, that was an exciting time for us. We were hoping to kind of have a record-breaking year. Certainly, there was a lot of opportunities. So I think what threw a wrench in that was we got to early March and kind of the collapse of the mid-market banking system here. SVB collapsed, followed by another 5 or 6 tech banks in that space, and then a kind of a consolidation of a number of other mid-market banks that did not participate in tech, but certainly got pulled down because of the effects of the market. So, what we saw, and certainly, it was kind of a punch in the face for us as well for about a month or so there. But certainly, we pulled through. I think for us, it just speaks to the strength and kind of safety of the bank, and how we structure our deals, how we structure or kind of manage the assets under our belt, and it speaks to our management team. So, and I think if you look at Bridge Bank, we've been ranked the #1 mid-market bank the last few years. We've had the #1 ranked CEO, CFO, COO, and so I think top down, we have a very smart, very agile kind of banking group, and we were able to weather the storm. So we pulled out of 2023 with no defaults. We were able to protect the entire book. We had to restructure a few deals to kind of keep people moving forward. But that's how we like to. We want to make it a partnership, and we want to make sure we're being a value add to our client base, and not a hindrance from that standpoint. So certainly proud of the work we did and kind of pull through. I think now we're not going to go back to the previous market of banking where we had one bank kind of at the top, and then 3 or 4 banks below that kind of fighting for second position, and then a few other kind of part-time players. I think we looked at movement of assets. Certainly JP Morgan was a big winner there. Some of the other bigs, Wells Fargo, Bank of America to a lesser extent, but that's starting to kind of disperse. So when you look at kind of banks, historically the mid-market banks have been the lenders, and so now there's a lot of new players in the space. So you look at kind of First Citizens, you look at Commerce Bank, or some of the others. So it's still the same people, a lot of my same friends that I've been working with for 25 years now. But I think it's just understanding what their new capabilities are, what the limitations are under these new kind of guidelines. And I think the big winners from the venture debt side, or the debt side, is really the funds. So, to kind of fill that gap for that 6 to 9 period, a lot of the private funds that we saw up there kind of stepped up and filled that. I think venture debt was a bit of a struggle, one, because of the lack of capital on the equity side. So, we kind of saw a couple of things. One, in second half of 2022, kind of backtracking a little bit, we started having valuation issues, right? Companies started coming down. The companies that accepted the lower valuations kind of took their medicine immediately. They were able to move forward, and now they had the funding to weather the storm. Those companies that postponed have been kind of kicking the can for a couple of years now, taking on safes, taking on converts. And now we've seen a lot of people just kind of messing cap tables. So I think that's really what we're going to see kind of going into 2024, is the acceptance of these lower valuations now that a lot of these groups are running out of runway, cleaning up of the cap tables, and really being able to move forward. I think people are kind of looking in multiple directions of one, how do we stay funded, stay relevant, and keep the lights on? We have other companies that still have a fair amount of runway, so they do have time to kind of be selective, clean up the books, and really put themselves out there. So whether that's, our conversations are, how do you look at different funding sources? Do we need to have a lead institutional investor to bring on debt? How can we bring on some more non-dilutive funding to really keep that cap table in check? And so those are conversations we're having. Is here's how we approach a VC-led round versus a strategic round versus a private equity exit or a partial exit. So I think we're seeing capital coming in from different avenues. Certainly an M&A standpoint or reverse mergers, we've seen quite a bit there. Q4 was a pretty good kind of kickoff for that side of it. We expect that to kind of continue here. A lot of the companies I know, working with firms, with you, AJ and David, are kind of pre-IPO, and they're kind of wondering now, is 2024 going to be a good time to have that IPO? Is that a rational time, or is that more of a 2025 issue? And I think, when we talk about it's an election year, it can be a little tight, interest rates are still high, but the Fed's hinting at we're going to have at least a quarter, if not a 0.5% drop, hopefully, Q1. So that should start to ease some of the pressure, one, in regards to interest rates. And then two, we're hoping that will start to bring a lot of the LPs that have been on the sidelines, a lot of the smaller kind of angel or small VC funds, bringing those LPs back to the table to really start moving some of that early innovation along that's been kind of on the sidelines for about a year. So I think that's where the optimism is as interest rates yields start to drop. The attractiveness right now of, hey, I can get 5% in the money market, or I get, bond yields 7 to 9%. I don't want to take risk in the market here, be kind of safe and secure. That's going to start compressing. And once that starts compressing, the low valuations here in, medtech, med device, healthcare, life sciences, broad stroke, become a lot more attractive. And I think the LPs that have stayed in with their funds are going to be very happy in the next couple of years, because they're going to make a lot of money on these kind of bargain basement deals that they're seeing. So I think we're going to see a huge reset this year. Not sure on the IPO jump yet. I think waiting to see the first couple of companies that go, and if they have success, I think we could see a good mini run on the IPO markets. If not, I think that really shifts into kind of early next year and have the jump there. But I think M&A activity is going to be another great year for M&A. Q4 was great across the board. I think that's going to carry throughout the entire year from that end of it. And then certainly VC funding, I think, will get better as the year goes on. Second half of the year should be a lot stronger as those LPs start to come back to the table and really start to overfund a lot of these VCs, especially that early mid-market, to really get that innovation going.
Great. Thanks, Ed. So a lot of context on how the banking system is interacting with this industry from 23 into 2024. It's interesting. I'd love to hear, Bhavesh, what perspective you have on sort of looking back on 2023. How did it shape up in your corner of the market? And then sort of following that as trends into 2024, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I referred to it before. I think 2023 was really the year of cleaning house, right? It was cleaning house in the big strategics. It was cleaning house within the VCs. It was really, resizing. Ed talked about, some of those cleaning up the cap tables, going out and looking at the revaluations, right? People looking and even having down rounds. So looking back was, fortunately, I say from a Truffle perspective, we were fortunate we were able to close the first round of our new fund. So we were lucky from that standpoint. And I think, because of the track record and everything that Truffle has achieved. But as Ed talked about, people were being very conservative with the investments, and you had safer bets outside of the investment markets there as well. If we now sort of fast forward in terms of today and then the current state, there was the expectation of the big bang, and the big bang didn't happen, right? So I think it was a softer landing than people had feared. And so whilst I don't think, there's going to be, as Ed touched on it, the huge IPO windows, although I do want to caveat that Truffle IPO'd in the New York Stock Exchange a company called Abivax for ulcerative colitis, and that was the largest French IPO in history. So the strong will survive is the bottom line, what I'm trying to say. And so investors will still be picky in terms of where they're going to go, as we are. I think the diligence will be longer, more strenuous, right? If I look at the innovators out there, be prepared to go through several rounds and really, in the past, maybe a VC may have rung up, the local friends and family doctors. Now they're going to want to go and speak to, their doctors. They're going to want to go and speak to the innovators' doctors. They may even want to go and do some market research, right, to really make sure that they're going. And then the sense of urgency in 23 was not there to go and do some transactions, right? It was sort of a hold and wait. Let's see how these things go. I think we're going to see an uptake. I think definitely we're already seeing some good M&A activity. I don't foresee, the IPO window to really open up heavily at the moment for all the things that Ed touched on. But things are going to be more, as we said, more positive for the right portfolios and for the tuck-in acquisitions and for the strategics there as well. That the conversations I'm having, they are now lining up and putting new investment opportunities into the hopper and having those portfolio of initiatives there as well.
Great. Thanks, Bhavesh. And David, I'd love to turn to you and hear your thoughts on the people you've been speaking with this week, or the clients you've been working with over the past year, and how 2023 shaped up and how that's looking to march into 2024.
I think everybody who's here, no matter what you do, everybody was happy to turn the calendar and, crumple up the 2023 and put it in the trash and move on to 24. So there is this cautious optimism that's here. But I think two things are going to be interesting indicators. You heard Ed and Bhavesh talk about them. I think it's going to be financing and IPOs. Both of them, there's a long line of companies that are waiting to go public, but nobody really wants to be the first one or two companies to go public to test the market. But if we're lucky enough that whoever are those first few life science IPOs and the stock holds its value and things go well, I think there's going to be a lot of people running to be next in that line. The flip side is if things are choppy, they might be choppy for a while, and the IPO window, might be a very slow crack in the window, not getting fully opened up. So I think that's interesting to watch. And then I think the financing numbers for Q1, if you had to raise money last year, you probably didn't. You said, okay, I'm going to wait. Last year in JP Morgan, we said, okay, I'm going to wait till the second half of 24. That's when it's going to be better. Turns out it wasn't. And a lot of companies, I think Bhavesh said, a cleaned house, or, they did belt tightening. But they're getting to the point now where you can only tighten your belt and cut costs so much. They're going to need cash, and they're going to need cash in 24. And that means potentially raising at a time where the valuations still haven't returned. And as Bhavesh mentioned, it's if you've got money, it's you've got plenty of options of where to put it. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the Q1 funding numbers are for early stage, even the B rounds and C rounds that are to take companies public. I think the story with Medtech, M&A is always the best exit, even more than IPOs. But I think the IPOs and the biotech boom, fueled really 5 years of incredible growth in life sciences. And, does that come back this year? That's the biggest question mark.
Great. I have a question sort of on all of that point. We've been talking a lot about investment and M&A and potential IPOs. Someone from the audience was curious about thoughts on public-private partnerships that would help drive research and medtech innovation, and whether you think that there might be any growth in grants and non-dilutive funding from those sorts of public-private partnerships.
I mean, I'll go ahead and kind of jump off what I was saying too. I think companies are in need of money, and the VC game is changing. We're not sure what it's really going to look like, but it's not going to be what it was before. So companies have to get creative. Non-dilutive funding is great. The grant cycle takes time, and there's a lot of interesting, I think, unique public-private partnerships, and companies, I think, have to have an open mind. It used to have, have plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C. Now you need to have, D, E, F, and G as well. And public or non-dilutive funding has got to be in that mix, because at the end of the day, you need the dollars to fuel your growth, and it doesn't necessarily matter where they come from.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see it as the primary source. It's going to be definitely there as an adjunct. And again, Truffle boasts, having raised the largest non-dilutive funding through the European Central Bank, and then the venture bank in France called BPI France. But it's always seen as an adjunct to doing external funding raises as well.
Yeah, certainly. If you can get it, I go for it. And it's not something that we look upon negatively. With all the funds that we work with, it's still a positive. It's another it's a non-dilutive source of funding. So if you can get access to it, go for it. I haven't heard that they're going to increase kind of that funding level. I think that's where this election year is important to kind of see where we land and where that support comes from. That end of it, what those dollars will look like going into next year. But we know that there is a lot of funding out there with NIH or BARDA or other opportunities. So I think, if you have a program that fits that bucket, then, certainly I would strongly suggest looking in that direction.
Great. And another question from the audience, curious about traditional tech companies and what you've been seeing about them dabbling in medtech and life sciences. I touched on this very briefly earlier. I'm curious about what you're seeing in each of your corners of the markets on companies like, we saw Amazon getting into the market. We saw Microsoft getting into the market. I've seen a lot of name tags this week from those companies. What have you seen from increased competition from those more traditional tech sectors?
I think that's been a theme over the last decade, but accelerated in the last 5 years, and I think we all see it with what's on probably half the people on this call, your wrist. The Apple Watch just had, there was a big headline in the news, a patent infringement fight, and they might have to stop selling it. Like, the watch is amazing. The more people you talk about it, I had a friend who it's alerted him that he's having an irregular heartbeat. He went to the ER, thank goodness, and he was an AFib, and his watch told him before things got serious. So I think that's not going away, and it's only going to get more, especially as we're seeing the tech and medtech true convergence and AI getting in the mix. These companies are all experts in that area. They've got a lot of money to invest. They all have life science groups that are growing in terms of people they're attracting and dollars they're putting to work. So I think you have to pursue all players, the traditional big medtech exits, but also the creative exits, the Amazons, the Apples, because they are the big players as well. I mean, Ed, what do you see kind of in the banking and the exit angle?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly, there's so much capital there. When you talked about the bigs and the big tech, and that's certainly been a big interest of theirs. And there's billions of dollars to be had. So I think from the tech side of it, they've hired some really smart people, and they've been able to steal some top people in the industry to really kind of come over and help push them in the direction they want to go. I think they're still testing the waters a lot, so I haven't heard of any major deals this year or kind of in the works. But that's one area where there is a lot of capital. I think they've been kind of sitting on the sidelines, deciding what direction do we want to go in, what part of the market do we really want to push in the next couple of years. And that's kind of our curiosity as well. So, where are those partnership opportunities going to come for a bank like us with some of these, mid-market, growth companies and that are drawing attention, Amazon or Apple, or Microsoft, or any of these larger programs. And so I don't have any, deep insight there. For you, it's the same thing. I've been watching them the last 5 or 6 years, and attending some of the talks, attending some of the events, and trying to network within that individuals, really understand what their market strategy is. And my conclusion is they're still trying to figure out what their market strategy is and where they're going to go. And I think once they decide there's one or two sectors we really want to go after, or we really feel that the technology and that the early startup space is there, I think they will go after, start to gobble up, and really start to push in that direction. Right now, I'd say they're still testing the waters, would be my opinion.
Yeah, and I would just add, we talked about cleaning the house. They've been cleaning the house as well, right? So they've been focused on getting leaner, getting tighter. I mean, you've heard of all the mass layoffs that happen in the tech sector, and outside of the household tech companies, right? You mentioned the Amazons, the Googles as well, that may have perhaps initially underestimated, right? Coming to market and bringing healthcare innovations as well. I would say now there's more of a willingness to put the hand out, right? And work together in a collaborative standpoint. So we talked about partnerships in terms of earlier, but partnerships with technology providers. If you look at NVIDIA, right? If you look at all the partnerships that they are now striking with the big strategics, and also creating a open platform, right? Thinking about the mining era, right? With the picks and shovels, they're saying, hey, we're going to be the ones that are going to help you develop the picks and shovels, and creating the APIs so that we talked about all the AI and machine learning capabilities. So that we'll create this ecosystem where you can come in, you can connect with us, and we'll stay true in our core and our capabilities, and allow you to come in and shape it in the way that you can see, because they can't be everything to everybody as well. So there's opportunities there, again, within the robotics space as well. Think of the companies with the KUKA, right? The arms, again, doing other partnerships with companies there as well, where they can stay strong in their capabilities, but having dedicated teams to go and focus within that healthcare space and to support and be more of a collaborative partner, as opposed to, hey, but we're going to go into healthcare, we're going to design it all ourselves.
Yeah, I being in the tech sector myself, and approaching all of these questions for digital health companies or biopharma companies that are dabbling with digital health, a lot of them have been concerned about the traditional tech entrance into the market. And I think for a long time we were looking at that standard Silicon Valley approach of move fast and break things, which just ran into a wall with healthcare, right? Just very risk averse, very much of a longer sales cycle, the regulatory approach that everything needs to follow, needs a pathway to market. And I think, as you were saying, Bhavesh, a lot of these companies thought that they would be able to come in and innovate quickly and overhaul things, and just are now looking to partner more and understand the market more. And I'm seeing a lot more people who have, a lot more companies that have focused products, because especially when they approach, a large healthcare system, multiple different points of contact for different solutions that they might be offering. You might consider it to be one sort of overarching digital health solution that's making things easier to interact with patients or to share information within the hospital. But seeing situations where if you're selling into that hospital system, you've got to talk to one point of contact for one part of the system and a different point of contact for a different part of the system. Or, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you've got to be selling to the payer rather than the provider, et cetera. I think all of those difficulties that these companies faced over the past 10 years, and really started to realize that they need to fit themselves to the healthcare market rather than overhauling the healthcare market is really starting to come to fruition these days. And I agree. I'm seeing a lot of those partnerships. And I can say I went to the Microsoft Health event on Friday, and it was hopping. There were a lot of people there. There was one of the kickoff events for the Microsoft's Pegasus program, where they had identified a number of digital health startups, in particular a lot of AI startups that they were going to be supporting in the market, so that they could get more traction for these companies, more traction for AI and healthcare, and really could just grow that. And that's what I've seen all week is a lot of young companies trying to get into this market, but a lot of interest from traditional tech. Great. A question came in. I got to be honest. They used an acronym I'm not familiar with, so I'll share it with the panel. It says GLP has held an outsized impact on medtech, notably in the public markets. What's the general sentiment going into 2024? So GLP. Wasn't sure if any of you are familiar with that, or if the person who shared the question could spell it out. All right, seeing a couple other similar looks. I'll come back to that one if that person wants to put a follow-up question in. Continuing on AI questions, some interest from the audience on where do JPM participants believe there's been real and credible opportunities to pursue? Oh, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Yeah, so AJ, I think right, and the question came in. I think they're talking. I think it's a lot of words in one sentence. I think they're talking about the obesity drugs, the GLP-1 obesity drugs, which have been the biggest life science story of the year. Just the amount of money there, and I think, I think we alluded to it before. Like, it's those drugs are not going anywhere. The studies that are coming out now saying, there was one study recently that says once you go off, if you're on the drug, you have to take the injectables. They're expensive. But once you go off, it found women are gaining more weight than they lost. So it's almost once you're on it, maybe not for life, but you're on it until you don't want to lose weight. So I think we're going to see a lot of fast followers there because, everybody wants to look younger and thinner. So that's just society right now.
And David, sorry, I know I touched on it before regarding the GLP-1s and the keynote panel yesterday at JP Morgan. But that was the exact point, because you've got a lot of health providers today that are now putting lifetime caps on these GLP-1s because they know that it's going to become unaffordable. And then the discussion was, well, would you put a lifetime cap on a type 1 patient or a type 2 diabetic that needs to have insulin, the daily insulin injections? And so, and again, just to sort of echo as well, David, I had a friend who attempted to use the GLP-1s to bring down their weight. And they said the exact thing. Immediately once they came off there, he said he was as hungry as a horse and he couldn't stop eating. So it's not something that you can have, as your bikini diet, or in Europe, your Speedo diet maybe, right? It's something that's going to be there indefinitely. There's going to be more innovations coming out there within the GLP-1 space. Innovations that could potentially reduce the side effects, because there are side effects to this and several patients that are going to be contraindicated. But despite the noise, and I call it noise, I do appreciate that there's been several valuations that have been impacted by this. There's still going to be the market, whether it's in the obesity, whether it's in the diabetes space, and also having strong intimacy within the bariatric space in my former roles in Medtronic, this is going to be an adjunctive treatment. And there's so many, unfortunately, obese population out there and type 2 diabetics that you're still going to need some form of medical device or some form of treatment there as well.
Great. One more question came in from the audience, and then I'll ask the last question to the panel to close off for today. People are wondering if there's any particular segments of the AI market that companies seem to be more willing to invest time and money in. I've certainly seen AI this week and over the past year in everything, and over the past 10 years in more and more items. I think people are looking to see where can this really have tangible value. I'll surface one particular example though, just to have a better answer to the question. Clinical trial management has been an area where I've seen a lot of investment in AI, including identifying clinical trial participants and surfacing data from the trial for management. It's been an area where there's a lot of slow and steady growth, people who are doing interesting things there. It's perhaps not as flashy as some other uses, but I'm definitely seeing a lot of interest in deploying AI and helping roll out clinical trials, run them, manage them, find participants, and then surface the data and continue to use it. I'm not sure if anyone else has thoughts
Yeah.
on hot areas of AI.
Well, I think, another area hot off the presses was, this week, another deal that was announced was GE Healthcare signed a deal to acquire AI developer MIM Software, which is a provider of medical imaging analysis programs for radiation oncology, theranostics, molecular radiotherapy, and urology. So I think that's another area, obviously, for reviewing imaging where AI can be faster, cheaper, and indications are more accurate than even humans reviewing images. So I think that area, clearly others are thinking about it. GE Healthcare made a big play just in the last few days.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw the number of approved regulated devices and regulated techniques for AI just leaping forward over the last couple of years. And absolutely, radiology is a huge percentage of them, far and away larger than any other category. Bhavesh, I saw you about to chime in with some thoughts that you had. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I think David touched on it before. I think one of the challenges, and we've evaluated several opportunities or softwares as medical devices, is how do you monetize it? And so as a standalone system, that piece of AI tool really needs to have some transformative value. And the deal with GE made perfect sense, right? They sell radiology equipment. This is a differentiator for them to differentiate from the Philips and the Siemens. So if there's AI that can allow the human to do more than they could see within the naked eye, which was this example. If there's AI, as you touched on, AJ, and again, met a company yesterday that's allowing clinical trials to happen considerably faster because they're able to mine through data and allow breakthrough pharmaceutical therapies to come out faster. And then even AI to create a digital twin on the anatomy. And this is something that we've been able to do with one of our programs for patients that have a acute ischemic stroke. We're able to create a digital twin and then have the robot then use that digital twin to then actually navigate through the point of the thrombus. So it's really got to be disruptive. As a standalone system, the biggest challenge is going to be how do you monetize it? And then the other thing with AI, which is not as clean from a devices or a pharmaceutical standpoint, is that barrier to entry afterwards. And that's why people are still a bit nervous in terms of investing on this, and it's really got to be transformative and disruptive.
Great. So we're at the hour here. Love to just close off on one last thought from each of the panelists before people sign off at the end of their lunch, or at least back in the New England time zone. Just last thoughts on where are we going in 2024 if you look into your perfect crystal ball. What would you say is poised for this industry in the coming year? I'll open up to anybody who wants to speak first.
I'll take it. I think this year is going to be another continuation of great M&A activity. I think that's kind of continue to lead the market, especially the first half of the year. I think that's what's going to kind of help move some of the innovation forward, and certainly the strategics are still a lot of cash on hand. So I think we'll see some bigger deals continue to flow throughout the year. I'm hopeful second half of the year, VC activity will start to pick up and we'll start to move a little bit quicker. But certainly, here at JPM, conversations have been a lot more active, and that's been a kind of a positive outlook from our end. So a lot of the meetings I've had with VCs and with investors, a lot of the companies that we've had partnership meetings with, certainly there's that optimism, but it's still a time-consuming process. So we're hoping that the speed of which these deals are happening will quicken. But certainly, I'd say this will be another year of strong M&A activity.
Great. Bhavesh?
Yeah, I would echo everything what I'd said. You're going to see the uptake, whether it's VCs sitting on funds that may have started a couple of years ago that haven't deployed that cash, need to now go and deploy that cash. Obviously, it's not going to happen recklessly, but you're going to see more activity from an M&A standpoint, from the strategics as well. They're looking at, very much so tuck-in acquisitions from an M&A standpoint. I don't anticipate we're going to see the mega mergers, but looking at tuck-in acquisitions. And then from an innovator standpoint, as I've referenced a few times, the strong will survive. The technologies that are differentiated, the technologies that are disruptive, the technologies where you have a solid team and management team in place, and are making good progress there as well. They will be doing well and getting through this period. Activity will, I feel, increase in the latter part of the year as well. And already some of the conversations I'm hearing is about 25 already. So I'm expecting more to happen in the latter part as well.
Great. Dave?
Yeah, and I think Ed and Bhavesh did a good job. But I think one thing that Bhavesh just said, just to build onto it, is only the strong survive. Technology is so important in medtech, and I'd be remiss. I'm a patent attorney. We didn't really get into IP, but the number of discussions here, IP is driving the M&A. If you're going to spend a lot of money to acquire a company, you want to make sure you've got the runway, and IP is one of the strongest moats. So, I think the theme for everybody's 2024 should be file more patents.
As the other IP attorney on the call, I can say that's the strongest recommendation everyone can make on this call. So good. Thank you, Ed, Bhavesh, and Dave. Thanks for your time today. Thanks everyone for sharing your lunch hour with us. I'd love to turn this back to Nicole at MassMedic for some quick closing remarks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Such an interesting conversation. I wish we had more time. I'm sure we could keep going. Appreciate you all sharing your expertise. And thank you to those of you online who joined us today. As mentioned, a recording will be sent later today. So thank you for registering. And thank you again to Greenberg Traurig for hosting today's webinar. I encourage you to go to massmedic.com and check out all the other great events we have coming up. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.